Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, how you doing? Happy that you could join us. Of course, it's Friday. Everyone, I hope that you're doing well. You are ready for some Computer America. And hey, we have a great show planned for you with none other than Popzara.com, Popzara magazine, and of course Nathan Evans, the managing editor over there. He of course has a lot, on his plate to handle Popzara, and of course all the contributors that many of who are actually have been on the show before. And he does such a great job that we love having himself on just to talk about the latest and what's going on with technology and as it relates to everything from video games, movies, pop culture, things like that. It's always a lot of fun. If this is your first time tuning in for this particular segment, you're in for a treat. So everyone, welcome into the program one last time. Before we get started, computeramerica.com, that will have everything, including the show notes, that will have the website, links, articles, videos, anything that we talk about here today will be in the show notes. So be sure to check that out at computeramerica.com after the program. Okay, and let's see, there's also the live video portion. You can see Computer America, not just listen, but of course, any way you get Computer America, perfect. And last but not least, check out some of the articles. We have some new ones up there and some new ones. We will let you know when those are up, but hopefully within the next week or two. So, let's go ahead and get started. Bring our guest on. He's waiting oh so patiently in the wings. I assume I have him muted. He could be screaming expletives as we speak, but let's hope not. As we bring him on, everyone, once again, Mr. Nathan Evans. Nathan, how you doing?
Hey, Ben. And yeah, the audience couldn't hear me, but I was screaming obscenities.
I knew it. You were saying things like "gosh darn" and "heck all." I understand. It's
like watching a 1950s Looney Tunes cartoon, like "gosh tarnations," like "dag nabbit." It's like I'm Merry Melody. I'm screaming in merry melodies.
It ruined a whole generation of cursing, and we will never forgive them. But hey, welcome onto the program, and happy that you could join us. How have you been? It's you've had a busy go of it, as I understand it. Corey, just for anyone out there who missed it, Corey Gallagher is of course our resident gaming correspondent. He did not go to he did not go to E3, but he helped cover it after the fact this past Tuesday, and you actually sent people out there. So since you were last on, you've been busy. How are you?
I was in Los Angeles, actually managing the show from the show, but not actually at the show. See, that word salad, that's a way of saying that's what managers do. So no, I was en route. I was in LA, and I got to tell you something. Like, I don't know if Corey mentioned this. He's been there before. Have you ever been to E3? Have you
I've never been to E3.
You should go at least once.
Mm-hmm.
At least once. So, but no, it's like downtown LA is effectively taken over for this thing because for those who don't know, Los Angeles Convention Center, LA is a big place, and they don't just need one convention. They have everything else going on. So what the city does, Ben, it acts like as an auxiliary periphery
Mm-hmm.
of shows like E3. So entire buildings are taken over by advertising. So it's a very strange experience. So if you want to get everything that E3 has to offer, if you're at Los Angeles,
mm-hmm.
you have to make time to see the city because the show extends to bars, it extends to convention, it extends to other convention centers, it extends to the billboards. There's a lot going on. And so and I'll be honest with you,
mm-hmm.
I didn't really care about it this year, but it went smoothly, like a nice wine, like a nice cognac. And everybody had a good time, and that's never happened before, where everybody seemed to get along, and that's good. That's world peace is possible.
world peace as far as the confines of the Popzara staff. But hey, that's a stepping stone. We'll take it. And overall E3 though, you said that you weren't very excited for it. I know that there was not a lot of surprises because let's face it, you get a lot more publicity if you leak, quote unquote, everything before the show, so everyone's talking about it, and then you just show it.
We call that the apple, where, oh gosh darn it, there's been leaks. Oh no, didn't want that to get out.
Somehow this lab prototype phone got into the wild, and for some reason was picked up by a journalist. It's crazy.
It's how lucky they were there. It's like walking down the street and finding $100 bill. So, but no, but in reality that this was a very diminished E3. That there's been some speculation the show has outlived its usefulness, and so basically it has two evolutionary branches it could follow. It could continue morphing into what it might become, which is a lot of people fear, and some people are excited that it may become something like San Diego Comic-Con, which is so far away from its original intention, or it might just disappear. And it's disappeared before. It's gone away before. And so yeah, right now it's in transition. It's a lot of major players didn't even bother showing up. Sony wasn't even there at all.
Yeah.
Most of the companies don't even give press conferences anymore, and from what I can tell from the guys on the floor, like the absence was noticeable. However, it did allow certain companies to have a little bit more like time in the sun, like Ubisoft, Bethesda, for example, don't usually get as much attention as they got this year, which is cool. Nintendo, of course, dominated the show like they always do. I mean, that's just a given.
Right.
I don't know if Corey talked about it. He and I are completely at odds about the irrelevance of one particular story. He went goo goo gaga over the Microsoft Project Scarlet announcement, which is a new console or whatever. And I just think it's the biggest mistake I've ever heard. And I actually do think, and God bless Microsoft, they've done a good job with services. I don't think anybody cares. I think the news came and went, and I think people are maybe laughing at them from the shadows. It's like, yay! Remember all those promises for the Xbox One X? We're gonna keep them this time.
Yeah, well, and they actually took it a step beyond where Corey did indeed talk about that with 120 frames per second and 8K, which by the way was not really delivered with Project Scorpio, like you mentioned, with the Xbox One X, whatever, the super big one, but. Yeah, they're trying, and I guess they're trying to push the next generation of consoles out because, like Corey mentioned, and I'm sure like you know, and a lot of people out there know that Xbox is not faring well in the console market, so they kind of want to hit a little soft refresh.
To be fair, Sony did announce. Well, we say announce. They didn't announce anything. Like what we saw was just a bunch of hypothetical specs that may assemble themselves into a theoretical console at some point. That's what happens. You're a tech guy. You know how this works.
Right.
Sony did the same thing about a month ago. They announced, and oh gosh darn it, the specs were identical. Everything that Sony announced a month ago, Microsoft announced. Like to the spec, they announced everything exactly the same. It will do 8K. It will have a super speedy SSD drive. It will have a custom AMD processor.
Right.
Woohoo! It's because that's, we've talked about this, Ben, you and I, that there's no such thing as originality and innovation in the tech sector anymore. Everybody is buying from the same soothsayer. The old decrepit woman that has a little jar of bones and everything. She's
right.
Like, and so everybody, you need SSD, you need this, and that's exactly what Microsoft announced because that's exactly what developers are asking for. The developers rule, and I think if you want to jump into the stories, I think I have a nice segue about how this didn't used to be the case. I think the big story of the weekend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and this was one that I caught a glimpse of, and I went out and checked it last night, but I don't know anything about other than it actually happened. But I think you're going to segue into Apple losing one of its most prominent figures.
Yeah, or should I say the only prominent one they had left? And I think
I like Tim Cook.
I think Tim Cook is useless. I think he needs to go. I think Tim, like when you actually read the story, it just confirms everything that I've thought about Tim Cook. Okay, first of all, we're talking about Johnny Ive. Johnny Ive is the other half of Apple. The other half, of course, being Steve Jobs, who passed away. Wow, can you believe it? Almost 9 years ago.
Yeah.
8 years ago. And you and I have talked about this. We both like Apple. We're both fans of Apple to a certain extent. But the Apple of 2011 is not the Apple of 2019, not even close. And there's been a lot of talk about innovation and product innovation and what they can do and what they can't do. Here's the thing. One of the things of the story that got me was that it said Tim Cook rarely, if ever, visited Johnny Ive's design lab. And there's been a lot of internal confusion. Like, you've read the stories. It's legendary how Jobs would spend half his time in the design lab. He'd go there and tinker and play with things. Like, this isn't right. And if he didn't like it, he'd throw the project out and start over. He had a very unique relationship with Johnny Ive. And that relationship does not seem to have carried over.
And just to be upfront, I'll be honest, I have not read any biographies or anything like that, so I don't know. Like, the only thing I know about Johnny Ives is that he designed, of course, many of the iconic pieces for Apple, and the running joke I have in my head that I associate with Johnny Ives is that whenever Johnny Ives wants to innovate his design, he says, "Okay, what can we get rid of?" and then he deletes something. That's about the extent I know of Johnny Ives.
But it's one of those things where you can't just have someone and say, create. We talked about this. Innovation is not a gift that everyone shares. Not everyone has literally the eye for design. And as the story goes, it's very famous. Johnny Ives worked at Apple prior to Jobs rejoining the company in 98, 99, and he toiled away, and he was not promoted. And it was when Steve Jobs, who had just come back to the company, was taking a tour, that Johnny Ives accosted him and said, "Look, I have these ideas." And so the company was sitting on this talent pool, but there was nobody there that cared enough about design. And if you go back and look at Apple pre the reemergence of Jobs, it's a company in turmoil. The company was on its way out. I mean, they basically sacrificed everything to stay alive, and at some point they were going to go third party. The relationship between Jobs and Ive is legendary. It's one of the most prolific and successful partnerships in the history of business. And you said it. This is the team that developed the iPod, then they helped develop, the iPhone, then the iPad, and of course the iMac. The iMac was actually one of Johnny Ive's first projects. Like, everything these two guys did was legendary and game changing. And that has not happened with Apple since Steve Jobs' passing. The closest thing we have to innovation was the Apple Watch. But look at these products; they're iterative products. And I dare say anybody listening to this who's an Apple fan, point to me innovation in design since Steve Jobs died. It is not there. It's been iterative.
So what I noticed with this is not just me saying oh, I came up with this all by myself. No, Tim Cook was very upfront that despite we think about shareholders and money and markets and things like that, Tim Cook came into the space of CEO for Apple, and he said, okay, we're going to be less, I don't want to say he said less innovative, because obviously no one comes on with a negative, but he said, we're going to be more transparent about what we're going to do. We're going to be less surprises. Essentially, he turned Apple into a business instead of like a cult phenomena or like a thing. And he did a good job. I mean, it's more business-like than ever, but it's not innovative. It's just successful.
Well, the thing is that one of the things at one time Tim Cook was innovative. He was the best supply side. He was the best supply chain guy. This is the guy that helped turn Apple around, which Jobs had no acumen for. We all know about the lines waiting for iPhones for days, and then people, like the idea, like this, the aftermarket. The aftermarket for iPhones became an industry themselves, where people would double, triple their profits. They'd hire homeless people to stand in line. What Tim Cook did, and by the way, nobody has done this since. The closest that any company's ever done what Tim Cook has done has been maybe like McDonald's. If you go to a fast food restaurant that's not McDonald's, you're wait for 10 minutes. If you go to McDonald's, boom, boom, boom. They have everything so streamlined and so front loaded. It's like they prepackage everything to the point where it's seamless in most cases, and that's what Apple did. Tim Cook was a genius for supply side, but that lack of design acumen, that lack of basic innovative eye for detail has been clear. Apple has lost whatever luster they've had. It's clear. It's not an insult. They just don't have it anymore, and nobody can make the case that they do. Apple's entire MO at this point, their entire business model has been stay the course.
Right.
And we've seen that where they've held fast to these aging, fading designs and aging, fading operating systems, and it's been a critical lack. And the problem is, look at me. I'm one of those people. I know I can count you on 10 fingers and 10 toes the amount of people who have left Apple because they're stagnant. And they're not stagnant to the point where, okay, they don't have a new iPhone, but their business model is so inferior to what it used to be. The Mac is no longer a competitive computer at all in any way, shape, or form. It is no longer competitive to Windows in any way, shape, or form. They finally brought out a new modular Macintosh.
Mm-hmm.
They revealed it a month ago. It's $5,000-$6,000. That's ridiculous. They brought out a new Mac Mini. It's $1,000.
I think fully decked out. We were estimating, and we won't know the full price until about September time, but about $30,000 fully decked out.
And that's not including the monitor, which has $1,000 stand.
Right, and of course the monitor itself is another $5,000-$6,000. So
that's what I'm trying to say. There's nothing innovative here. Those
prices are shocking. Those prices are shocking. The prices are shocking, which is innovative in itself. It's the first time I've said really.
That might be the only innovation. Like, how can we make them think we're still relevant? You know what? We can't fix the thing. We fix the price.
So here's my thing with it is that if you have this talent pool that is, as you kind of called it, stagnant, people are unhappy with their with the direction of the company and blah blah blah. Like, if things are currently not working, of course you can attack it at the top and say, well, then maybe Tim Cook needs to go, and we need new leadership and try to get the team back together. Or the other option, why not let Johnny Ives go? Or, he of course quit. There's no letting him go. But why not let these prominent figures go and try to get new people in there and maybe get a new synergy? Because you can't just say it worked in the past, so it should work in the future.
Oh yes, that's exactly right. Like, there is no guarantee. Like, the idea is that if you're going to draw from a talent pool, one of two things: that person you're trying to get may already be working somewhere else. And Apple is such a big company that they are no longer willing to take those risks. Like, one of the reasons why Jobs and Johnny Ives and Steve Jobs were able to synergize so well is they were a company that had nothing to lose.
Right.
They hired Steve Jobs back. I mean, people don't remember this. When they hired Jobs back in the 90s, he was already very successful in his second business, which was Pixar.
Yeah, Pixar was good.
Yeah, go figure. What'd you do when you left Apple? I created the most successful movie company of all time. But no, I transformed Disney into a powerhouse. Like, he didn't need Apple. He was there, I think, mostly out of nostalgia. But then he transformed Apple from a company that needed to borrow money from Microsoft to survive into the biggest company the world has ever seen. And that's what I'm saying, though. It's like, for those people who discredit Jobs and say, "Oh, he's just this," well, how come everything he does tends to work? Because he had that eye for business. He had that eye for innovation, and Tim Cook does not, and he shouldn't have to. I mean, you can't just put someone in that role and they're going to have the same gifts of its predecessor. It doesn't work like that,
right.
And so I think what's going to happen is the only thing that Apple can do at this point is transition to a service company. And so I wouldn't be surprised, because that's what Microsoft has done, by the way. They've effectively transformed themselves to a service company. Same with Amazon, same with Facebook, same with all that.
Same with Google, yeah.
I don't know.
The real money is keeping the lights on and providing the hardware and the server space and things like that, and letting everyone else do the work, and you just kind of provide the backbone. That seems to be the best way to do it, and it looks like Apple, of course, you watch the WWDC as well. Everything that they announce, of course, it's the WWDC, so it's for the Worldwide Developer Conference, but they outlined just a few pieces of hardware and a lot of different services, and of course the death of iTunes and many, many more. So yeah, it looks like Apple is...
You see, that's another thing, the death of iTunes on Mac. That's the thing. When they announced their Apple Arcade, which is their game service, on Mac, like, they still don't get it. Like, they're like, one of the reasons they just announced yesterday that Apple Music has 60 million subscribers, right?
Right.
And that's a lot. Don't get me wrong, but that's a lot. But the only reason they have that many subscribers is because they've opened up Apple Music on Android. They've opened up the platform. I mean, we've been through this. We've seen this happen with iTunes and iPod. iTunes and iPod existed before the Windows version, but they were not successful until Windows. You have to acknowledge that you no longer have that user base that can sustain itself the way it used to be. I mean, if you limit your services to iPhone, you're gonna, you'll be successful up to a point, but you will not be as successful as you need to be to
Right.
carry it. And so I don't know. I just think it's, this is a company that 2 years ago released an iPhone and a Macintosh that were incompatible with each other.
They
And
they had adapters.
well, here's the thing. No. What I mean is, like, you literally could not, they literally sent mixed messages, and I'll tell you why that's important. Because I saw Amazon did the same thing this week, and no one talks about it because no one cares enough about Amazon the way they care about Apple. But let me explain. So you have different divisions that create, and when Jobs was president, when Jobs was alive, he would poke his fingers in every division and make sure that there'd be synergy. Right? I mean,
Hmm.
one of his last big legacies was iCloud. And iCloud, this is a guy that famously scrapped the entire system and told him to start over. And so when you have a Macintosh that has one port, and then you have an iPhone that very publicly gets rid of that port because they say we don't need this, that's sending a very confused message to the marketplace. It says this is a company that there is no singularity anymore with the company. There's nobody there. There's no godlike character able to vacillate between the different communities and synergize it. And that's apparent with their confusing business model. I mean, a smarter person than I could probably make you the case with diagrams about what's wrong with Apple.
Hmm.
But let me. So I think it was last week. Amazon announced a new partnership with Toshiba. Amazon works with Toshiba to make 4K TVs with HDR.
Did not know
Here's the
that, but
problem.
okay.
Yeah, and they're pretty awful. But of course Amazon does it because Best Buy does it, because Google does it. I mean, Amazon plays it safe, which is why they're so successful. They don't take risks, but they also don't incur a lot of failures. So they introduced this TV that has Fire TV built into it, that has HDR, it has Dolby HDR. Here's the problem. Dolby HDR is incompatible with Amazon content. So you can buy
Hmm.
this Amazon Fire TV from Toshiba, but you cannot watch and enjoy the Amazon 4K content the way it's supposed to be. Like, nobody's paying attention at these companies. These are big trillion-dollar companies, and nobody is watching out to make sure they got the basics done. It is so strange to me. You
There,
know?
there's a lot, of course, to break down there with patents and licensing fees and things like that and standards. Like,
HDR10 is the standard. It's it's royalty free.
you're right, and then Dolby, but then Dolby aside, like, there's a big mess when it comes to tech and compatibility.
Yeah.
I'm noticing it myself. Like honestly, one kind of thing that I like to point to is, like, I thought Windows 10 was finally on my side. I was like, oh look, you can.
What did you assume?
I assumed that when Windows 10 had smartphone functionality, you could sync the two. You could send pictures over some kind of connection that, either Dropbox or whatever Microsoft would have. You could essentially say, I have an iPhone in my pocket. I have a Windows 10 desktop in front of me. They finally realized that, hey, two of the most popular articles, purchased in America, maybe we should make these things work together natively. And turns out, no, they just made it so that, like, I could ping my iPhone for some reason. Like, it really did nothing. And it really showed that compatibility
Yes.
is just not at their forefront. It's just not.
By the way, you wanted on your Windows PC what, I hate to say it because of what I just said, you wanted what Apple, iPhones, and Macs have now. You wanted that congruence. You wanted that compatibility.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
promised that, and they did not deliver it. I know exactly what you're talking about. Continuity. They even called it continuity. I think it was, where you could get you get your text messages on your phone. Excuse me, on your PC.
Yeah.
You could transfer things. Yeah, Macs and iPhones can do that, and they do it really well. That's the kind of crap I'm talking about. That stuff works well, right? But if you're a Windows 10 user, which, by the way, Windows 10 people outnumber Mac people like 20 to 1, you're looking at all these cool things, and you wish you could do it too. And Microsoft could do it. Microsoft had their own phone, didn't work. They discontinued it. Microsoft had their own music service, didn't work, got rid of it. Microsoft has a lot of cool things, but they haven't been able to make it work. And so when you see these missed opportunities, it has nothing to do with failure of concept. The concept works fine. It's the failure of implementation. And I think that's what we're starting to see happen with Apple as the leadership role that Jobs and John Ive used to have is gone, and now they're starting to have different. They're starting to basically adopt the same business strategy as their competitors, which is again makes them a lot of money, but it no longer gives them the fundamental control the way they had. And it's sad. It's really sad.
If anything, it gives room for someone else, and who knows? I think there are tech companies, tech startups out there. I think I've heard of one or two in the past couple of years. It gives room for someone to come in and shake up the market, because obviously Apple used to shake up their own market, but now now I think it's up to anyone.
Apple was their own market, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and by the way, Craig, of course, former host of Computer America, asked in the chat room just now, is iTunes going away because, I guess, under a rock? But yes, Craig. Well, not in so many words. Like, they haven't said iTunes is being discontinued on X date, but they have said that they're bringing out Apple Music, Apple TV. I think they have like an Apple Arcade, like you mentioned. Essentially, they're beefing up their podcast and ebook services. Every feature that iTunes had is now being split into multiple services.
Real quick, which is exactly what Microsoft does with OneDrive, which is exactly what Apple does with their Office suite. What do they call it?
The iCloud?
What is it?
The iCloud?
No, if you have an iPhone, you have an Android phone, you know what I'm talking about. Google splits up their services via app. Like Google Docs is an app,
right?
Google Sheets is an app. They separate the apps. So what Apple's doing, to prove my point, they are bringing to the desktop exactly what other companies do to the mobile space. They are taking one application and splitting it into many. And right now, that's only going to happen on Mac, and I assume it will roll it on PC at some point. Mm-hmm. The reason I don't think it's rolled out yet, and I'll be honest with you, is because I know iTunes. You can download and install iTunes in the Microsoft Windows App Store.
Right.
The Windows App Store is a giant mess, but I'll just say this: it doesn't have the ease of use of the Mac Store. Like if you have a Macintosh, you probably use the Mac Store all the time. It's pretty good, right? It's not bad. Windows doesn't really do that. Nobody really installs things from the Windows Store. It's a big pain in the butt.
No.
So I think that will come. But you see, that's their strategy, Ben. They're just doing what everybody else is doing.
Yep.
And that is a sign of danger for a company that has built their bread and butter on being themselves.
So
it's not a good thing.
In the show notes, which we're going to put up on Computer America after the program, you have this article from the Wall Street Journal. I'm sure you just picked one, and there are many other.
Oh, tons.
Yeah. Pretty much everyone carried a story about this. But the point is, let's see. So the announcement raised a thing, and by the way, the biggest clickbait I saw last night about this was Apple stock price drops $8 billion, after Johnny Ive's announcement. But it was like, less than 1%, and it recovered like instantly. It was like, that's some great clickbait. But they said that Apple is seeking new forms of growth. Let's see, Mr. Ive's planned new company, so he is starting a new company, will count Apple among his primary clients. So he's not under the direction of, at least he's not within the corporate structure of Apple, but it sounds like he will still be working with Apple, just kind of within his own company, which hopefully gives him a bit more leeway to, kind of be more self-directed. But it sounds like their relationship is not completely over.
That's the thing, though. I don't know if this is good news. Like I said, Johnny Ives is a guy who clearly, just based on the history that I know about him, needs direction. Like I work with creative people all the time, and I can tell you something. Anybody who's ever managed creative people know that creative people don't spontaneously create things out of the air. Mm-hmm. A lot of times they need to be managed. They need ideas to be massaged. They need criticism. And Apple had Johnny Ives, and nothing came of it until he met Jobs. And then after Jobs died, the creativity seemed to go away. Like there's no one product that Johnny Ives innovated after Jobs' death. It seems that he required that incessant needling and prodding from someone who's so basically an uber micromanager like Jobs. I mean, you haven't read any biographies on him or anything, like you said, but Steve Jobs is famous for this. That was his thing, for being that guy.
maybe the cocaine just stopped flowing. But with that, exactly. I will say that everyone, there's music playing in the background. Nathan Evans, Popzara Magazine. Everyone, we're going to transition away from Johnny Ives. Like we said, his career is not over. He is still very much in the spotlight. And hey, speaking of the spotlight, everyone, when we come back, we have tons more stories to talk about here. Everyone, stay tuned. More Computer America, more Popzara after this.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. That's 800-215-4461.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
Welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 32 minutes past the hour as we continue on here. And everyone out there, thank you so much for continuing on. If you're just tuning in, then you need to go back to the podcast version of Computer America. It is today's show in its entirety, and you should listen to it. Very, very good discussion concerning Johnny Ives. And yeah, just overall what's happening over at Apple. I mean, how can you not nitpick over $1 trillion company? It's almost impossible. But very happy to have Nathan Evans here from Popzara Magazine, managing editor. And Nathan, thank you for continuing on with us. Let's go ahead and transition away from Apple. I know that's going to be hard. Let's go to one of the other stores because we have lots to talk about. So I'll let you decide.
I don't know. There's so many. Let's see here. Well, shall we have fun? Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we talk about...
Here. I'm going to jump in here, and I will say this just because I'm a fan of his music, and I saw Michael Jackson. I was like, well, hey, we can talk about this. And I'm not saying I'm a fan of Michael Jackson's music, although, of course, I think almost everyone is. But Michael Jackson and did you hear Weird Al Yankovic, I think, just announced today that due to Leaving Neverland, which I think was debuted on HBO, due to the allegations and the controversy surrounding Michael Jackson and his legacy, Weird Al Yankovic has decided to pull all of his parody music that was a parody of Michael Jackson, which, were tons. He, some of Weird Al's best songs were parodies of those. So,
I didn't hear that, but now I'm depressed. I love Weird Al.
He says that he won't play them live. That's his thing, like on stage. Like they're still available, he just won't play them live.
You see, that's the point. I heard the same thing happen with one of the people from The Simpsons. I think Al Jean. One of the most famous episodes of The Simpsons had Michael Jackson on it, where he played a mentally deficient person who met Homer in the mental institution, and it's one of my favorite episodes of all time. And I actually spoke to the guy who helped write the episode. His name is Mike Reese, and we had him on the the podcast a few months ago. A very funny guy, and I told him, I said, "This is one of my favorite episodes of all time." And we talked about it, what it was like. And he was not a fan of Michael Jackson, but the episode was more than just Michael. And so the problem is that this documentary came out called Finding Neverland, and I watched it, and it's interesting, but I have a problem when people die and they become attacked and they cannot defend their legacy. Michael Jackson is very famous for being accused of child molestation, of course. He defended himself in court, and he was exonerated. And whether he did anything or not, I don't know. I just don't. But I know that we live in an age when allegations are more important than evidence. And I think we just survived the Me Too era. And I don't want to get into that, but I will say this. There's been this flux of artists and everything, and they assume that no one wants to hear this. And the reason I sent you this story, it's because I don't see any evidence that people don't want to hear Michael Jackson music. So, Al Jean can pull the Simpsons episode and Weird Al can pull the music, but they're in the minority. And that's the thing that must scare people who are the cultural arbiters of information. Like, for example, YouTube will pull videos they don't like, Twitter will pull tweets. Like, we won't tolerate this because they want to give the impression that nobody wants to hear this stuff. Now, you may consider it hate speech. You may consider something hate speech because you don't agree with it, or you may like something and defend it and say it's not hate speech because you agree with it. I don't know. That's up for you to decide. But for all this pulling of Michael Jackson music, it doesn't seem to have hurt his music. In fact, all of the information says his music is more popular than ever, and not just Michael Jackson, but R. Kelly as well.
Yeah.
And
well, and so the big thing that, like, the only thing I want to kind of qualify this is that Weird Al, for all of the for all the scandals that a lot of these celebrities get into, Weird Al himself is one of those that has really, I don't think, ever really had a scandal. He asks permission before he does any kind of parody work. He is as kind of clean as any celebrity can be. So like it's not so much it's not so much Michael Jackson is suddenly an abhorrent figure and he refuses to be associated with him. It's more Weird Al doesn't want to deal with any kind of potential controversy. So
that's what I'm saying though. He's there. He's being safe. He's what's the word? What's the term? Better safe than sorry. Better. But here's the thing though. I saw Weird Al live.
PC.
I've met Weird Al, and I'll tell you this. His Michael Jackson parodies are amazing. He would come out, he'd do the costumes, and I don't know how he'd do it so fast, but he's one of the best shows I've ever seen.
He's a true showman. Yeah,
he's amazing, and I love Weird Al to death, and everybody likes Weird Al. There's no controversies with Weird Al. Guy plays polka music, but I get why he would think this, right? I get why he would think this, but the problem is that when you have these people reacting to a documentary, to information that has been in the public domain for 20 years, in fact, almost 30 years, I always question why this mass movement now. And we talked about what we talked about with Apple, the way companies are all act like each other. There's some sort of thinking here that if we play this, it will cause controversy. The problem with that type of thinking is that it will cause controversy because we've empowered people. We've empowered a minority population. That means the people who are offended by anything to have an overweighted imbalance of power over the people who don't care as much as they do. Now, okay, maybe you think Michael Jackson's a child molester and his music should not be on TV. Okay, maybe you think that. But the vast majority of people do not think that. The vast majority of people want to hear this music. And so should this minority thinking have an overwhelming sense of power over the majority? That's what these entertainers think. And what's funny is what is it called? I think it's called the Streisand effect.
Yeah.
Where
when you try to delete something from the when you try to delete something from the internet, it only gets more popular.
Exactly. And so when I heard this story about Michael Jackson and R. Kelly, I was surprised. There was another story this week about the same thing. Louis C.K. performed another show, and every time he's been performing, he sells out stadia. He sells out every room. He gets cheers. People want to hear them. The public domain would say he's done. he's been accused of whatever. I don't know what he was accused of, masturbating or something. But whenever he does this, there seems to be absolutely no evidence that people are done with him. You see, just so you have this Me Too movement where people are just fired, they lose their jobs, sometimes over allegations. I saw Toy Story 4 when I was in California. I attended a Disney press screening of it. So yeah, I was one of the first people in the country to see Toy Story 4. Jealous.
And you weren't allowed to talk about it, but go ahead.
No, what allowed to talk about? But John Lasseter's name was on there. John Lasseter, of course, is the man who created Toy Story along with Steve Jobs and all that. Go figure. And his name was still on there. And there have been like, oh, we can't work with John Lasseter. He's been fired from Pixar. We don't know what for what yet. But we know, can a vague allegation destroy someone's career? And that's the type of dangerous thinking. I'm not saying that he should be exonerated. I'm not saying that. But I don't have enough information to make those choices yet. And I don't want the mob, who is almost always wrong, to decide what I see and decide how I feel about people. That's not fair to those people. That's just not fair. We don't live in that type of society. It doesn't mean I forgive them. I don't know what they did. But the vast majority of people seem to agree with me, Ben, is that I don't want to throw away these talented people because of vague allegations. I want to know what's going on. Let me make up my choice. When I watched Finding Neverland? I watched it. It was well made, but there's already been elements of it that have been discredited.
But that's kind of the opposite of what we've seen when it comes to consumer choice. And I've seen some about this where consumers, and especially younger consumers, they see the products and services that they utilize, purchase, what have you, they see them as an extension of themselves. So they want to make sure, for better or worse, I know it's not a strictly capitalist view, but it's, hey, Uber does not pay its employees fairly, and they have, sexual discrimination or what have you. I'm going to use Lyft instead. Like, that's a very younger consumer way of thinking.
Well, no, that's exactly, they're right though. I mean, if there's evidence that Uber does not pay their employees right, and you don't want to support that, that's no different than buying free range chicken or buying locally sourced coffee. You're able to do this, right? But then comes the next step, of which you have people that take advantage of that and say, well, here's my locally sourced coffee, but it's really not. Here's my free range chicken, but it's not. And you have people that are willing to take advantage of those people who find themselves morally superior. You know this. And so, again, going back to what we talked about, whether it's Weird Al doesn't want to play Michael Jackson music, that's his right to do it, right? Mm-hmm. That it comes on the cusp of this documentary is not surprising to me, because this is that type of mono thinking.
Right. Oh, and did we lose you? No, you're good. So yeah, and the reason I kind of brought that up, of course, is tied with this other article that you have here. Michael Jackson, R. Kelly, their music. Michael Jackson up 41% on streaming services after Finding Neverland, and then of course you have R. Kelly, who after the Netflix, I believe, documentary, where now his music is up 13% on streaming services, where I guess it's true. No, there's no such thing as bad press. It's as long as your name gets out there, hey, you're still going to garner some kind of attention.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, we've seen this happen even recently when it comes to people like dictators. Someone praises Fidel Castro, or someone praises Che Guevara or Adolf Hitler. Next, new people discover them, because here's a shocking fact of life. If you mention someone like Che Guevara, the vast majority of the kids today have no idea who he is. Oh, I don't know who this person is. Type. I'm going to look them up. Hey,
he's the guy on the T-shirt. Yeah, he's the guy on the T-shirt.
Exactly. Like, history does not flatten out people. That's not how it works. Che Guevara is an interesting guy. He's a monster, but he's an interesting monster. And when you have an interesting monster, that's attractive to some people. And don't ever make the assumption that just because you're smart and you've done the research and you discovered that Che Guevara was a monster, that other people are going to think he's a monster. Other people are going to love what this guy does. Same with Michael Jackson. By the way, if you're ever on an online forum and you come across a Michael Jackson fan, go away. Just go away. They are the craziest people on this planet. Michael Jackson fans online are the craziest people I've ever met. I really have. Like, literally, just stay away. Just say no.
Here's Yeah,
I don't
go
know.
ahead.
All I know, look, all I know is the idea that we can ban people out of existence is so fundamentally stupid and retarded that anybody who subscribes to this viewpoint, that if we just ban their music and ban their movies, that they'll go away and they'll never be heard of again. Like, you should not be in charge of you should not be in charge of a Starbucks bathroom at that point. You have no idea what you're doing. You just make things worse. It's almost hilarious how stupid it is, really.
Streisand effect is certainly a thing. This has certainly deviated into a topic that we really don't talk about here. Although I will say, I will bring this back around to tech.
I'll talk about Streisand all day long.
I will not. But I did.
Yentl, baby. Yentl.
I do want to say that there was another article about a week ago that we covered, and I covered it because I came up with a hilarious headline, but no one used it, even though I sent it to every major publication. This had to do with Google, and I'm not sure if you recall, Nathan, it was like the Google Doodle application where you could send in doodles to Google, or like they kind of give you like a blank canvas, and you could like draw a really rudimentary horse, and the Google artificial intelligence would try to guess you're drawing a horse, you're drawing a shoe, you're drawing a really, really bad horse. Like the AI was being trained by everyday people to identify even crude drawings of everyday objects. I'm sure that anyone out there who was in first grade at some point and knew about human anatomy can guess what was drawn the majority of time, or at least a large portion of the time.
Let me put it this way. If there's a billboard outside and people have access to paint and markers, that billboard will have phalluses on it at some point.
Exactly,
that's how it goes.
Which is why I came up with the Google with the Google Doodle Dong detector, but no one went for it. But anyways, the point is that Google then took all the data that they collected through the artificial intelligence and training and all the data, and they open sourced it. They let anyone have at it. You could run any kind of analytics you wanted on it. But the point is that the data had a glaring hole in it, and it was, as you said, phallus shaped. And the article that I read that really kind of resonated with me was that we see this kind of graffiti on everything from medieval manuscripts to ancient Roman walls.
Since the first caveman, when they painted the first bison, the second thing they painted was penis. That's been there forever.
So so it goes to show that a tech company was then, as you said, an arbiter of what was acceptable, when human history kind of points that this is kind of what we expect to see, and then you have changed the outcome. And
they've tried to. You can't hold back penises. The tide of history is against you.
Hey, they at least hit the delete button. So that's the last thing I kind of want to say was that
no. That's a very good point. Do you remember a couple of years ago Microsoft did that AI bot, and within 2 days the thing had become sentient to the point where you remember that? And it turns out the Twitter bot ended up becoming like a racist Donald Trump supporter.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, exactly. So it's just like people on Twitter. Like, you did it. You create, like, oh no, that's not who you are. That's exactly who people are. And that's exactly what they're afraid of. They want people to be this perfectly formed, croissant that comes out of the oven exactly like they think you should be. You should be nice. You should be kind. You should be progressive. You should hate the right things and love the right things. And they can't stand it. They cannot stand the fact that no matter how much they try to censor, how much they try to mold your personality, that you still like these banned things. How dare you like Michael Jackson? He molested. R. Kelly did those nasty things. You shouldn't be listening to that music. You shouldn't be drawing dongs. Well, you know what? That's how people are.
Ladies and gentlemen, anyone out there who is still listening at this point, you are all perfect croissants in my eyes. And with that being said, we are going to transition
At least I didn't say baguette.
Absolutely. So we're going to transition very abruptly over to a next story because we have a couple of stories and like 10 minutes left, Nathan. I did want to get this, and speaking of something that everyone will hate, there you go. There's your segue. Final Fantasy XIV. Many people still play it. It's an MMORPG with the Final Fantasy skin. I know a lot of friends that play it. A lot of people love it, and yeah, it still gets a lot of attention, but here we go, trying to transition a video game, which is a, especially like an RPG game where it's a very personal experience where you experience a story. That's not always the easiest thing to then kind of co-op into a television series. So I had not heard about this, but let's talk about this article from The Verge about Final Fantasy XIV.
Well, this is not the only story we have about video games coming to TV, but it's an interesting one because, long story short, they're running out of stuff to do, and everyone's looking for the next big thing. And Amazon is doing another Lord of the Rings, and Netflix is doing The Witcher, and so I suppose Sony has the rights to their own Final Fantasy stuff. Sony, by the way, people don't know this. Sony actually has their hands in a lot of the Final Fantasy IP. It goes back to like 2000. And they were the first ones to produce a Final Fantasy movie, that awful movie called The Spirits Within. And so, yeah, I don't know much about this other than I know that Final Fantasy XIV was a bomb when it came out. And yet, over the years, they've somehow able to salvage it and fix it and to make it a respectable game. So we're just going to have to find out. I don't think this is the first time they've tried to make this into a show, though. I think wasn't there an attempt before?
I know that there were Final Fantasy movies. I don't know if there were any television shows, and if they were probably directed at, like, let's face it, the Korean, Asian markets.
Well, it's funny. One of the big games at E3, of course, was the Final Fantasy VII Remake. A game that it's just one of those things where it's like trapped in nostalgia. So there's an attempt to try to remake Final Fantasy into a more consumer-friendly brand. I don't know, because Final Fantasy XIV has nothing to do with Final Fantasy VII except for chocobos. And so I don't know. I don't know. Final Fantasies can be different, are different from each other the way like Black Mirror episodes are different from each other.
I have played one Final Fantasy, and it was Final Fantasy 13, not Part 2, because I could not get through Part 1. Let's just say it came with, and that had like lightning and other characters like that. Like, it came with like 6 DVDs, and as someone who played Xbox his whole life, you buy Halo 2 and you have a Halo 2 CD. Like, the fact that it came with 6 DVDs, I got through like 3 DVDs, and I was like, this is not my kind of game, because I was spending more time watching than playing.
We'll see how it goes. I don't think there's much we can say about it. I will say one of the trailers that really impressed me this year was for the upcoming prequel series to The Dark Crystal, which is being produced as this major mega budget show on Netflix. So again, in the post Game of Thrones world, you have these television studios and streaming services. They're all anxious for the next big thing. They want to be the next Game of Thrones. So it wouldn't surprise me that they're trying unconventional IP.
Television studios, if you are out there listening, Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, get on it. I
think they already are. I think they might be producing that.
But it's like in like development heck or something like that. Like, it's not going well, I think. So I hope it is, though, because I'd really like to see it. But all right, so there's that one, and let's see. I think you also mentioned another.
Yes.
Well, yeah, another game coming to the TV series, or ID Software's origin story.
Yeah. So USA Network's going to be doing this. They're gonna make a drama comedy about the formation of id Software, which reminds me of when TNT made the Pirates of Silicon Valley back in the late '90s with again Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. This could be interesting because the id story is very, very interesting to me. And a lot of people don't know their story. I think, is it based on a book? Yeah, Masters of Doom, how 2 guys created an empire and transformed pop culture. I'm not going to spoil anything, but read about id Software. It's one of the most fascinating stories in all of video game history. And it's well worth looking into. And I will say this. Mm-hmm. My most anticipated game of the year is actually from id Software. It's the upcoming Doom Eternal. Yeah. Can't wait for that. It was all over E3.
Corey Gallagher was really gaga over Doom Eternal. So,
Doom was my favorite game of 2016. So.
And it looks like they have they've kept the spirit. It's a fun shoot 'em up, demons and just crazy settings, and it certainly look good. Nathan, let's go ahead and transition again real quick. I know we're just blowing right through these. Let's talk about this one. And Line announces social credit scores, a Google Duplex competitor. So social credit scores, and I'm assuming this has to do with, although this says Japan's dominant social media, China has social credit scores, and they are kind of a logistical nightmare. What is Line thinking?
Line is getting on board now. Have you ever used Line? Have you ever seen it?
I've never used Line.
Oh, do you have a lot of Asian friends in your tight circle?
I mean, I talk to people of that persuasion, but
In person.
No. Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
Go to any Chinese restaurant, go to any Asian store around you, and then look at their cell phone, and chances are they're going to have WhatsApp and Line. And so Line is everywhere. Line is one of the most successful social media apps out there. I'll just say this in full disclosure: I in my travels I come across hundreds, if not thousands, of Asian people in person, and every single one of them has Line. Every one of them. And I've had to diagnose Line. Line is there, and it is hugely successful. I'll be honest with you. I didn't think it was Japanese. I always thought it was Chinese. And when I heard this story and I heard that it was Japan instead of China, I was really confused. But I don't know why Japan would be doing this. I don't know why a Japanese company would be introducing social credit scores, unless there's an advertising component that allows Line to recoup some sort of financial investment by basically providing their advertisers with what's the word I'm looking for? Appropriate clientele, so to speak. Like if you have a good credit score, like in America, if you want to open up a bank account, get a job, get an apartment, we have credit here. So let's not get on our high horses. In America, we run on three credit reporting systems. You know this.
Well,
and
the social credit system that, as far as I know, like you said, has a lot to do with China, and they are, that there's human rights abuses and things like that we can get into, but we won't. I will say though that for Line, and just reading the article here, they mentioned that they will potentially offer users based on their score a line of credit through Line Pocket Money. Essentially, it seems like they're trying to get into the money loaning business, and this is their way of doing it.
By the way, so is Apple with a credit card.
Yeah, that's true. But at least they go through MasterCard. They aren't trying to put a number.
Yeah, but
on,
no. But MasterCard's the same. If you follow MasterCard's one of those companies that has made social justice one of their forebrands. MasterCard will not. MasterCard was influential with getting people kicked off Patreon. MasterCard does not give lines of credit to companies that promote certain type of weapons. So you have these companies at the forefront basically saying you're not doing socially acceptable things. And what happens is when I hear all this stuff about China, I'm not defending China. Oh, you have social credit. But we do that here. We do exactly the same thing here. We just don't do it under one roof. We call it capitalism, but it's not really capitalism if you have companies that are engaging in social engineering. And so whether it's your credit card company saying you can't say certain things, whether it's your Gillette telling you that you're not welcome here if you don't accept certain things. You have all these companies that are making it socially unacceptable to behave or talk in a certain way, and they're just doing it from a very different perspective. And this is not, like I said, and I suppose the goal with Line is to say that if you do all this stuff, you become very attractive, and therefore we're going to give you gobs of money and you can spend it. I don't have a problem with that to some degree, because that's what social clubs used to be back in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. You join a social club or a fraternity or something, that means that you've been vetted, right? So if you've been vetted, if that way companies know that you could be trusted. Oh, his credit score is probably pretty good because he's a member of this. It's just another identifier. Again, this is a larger conversation that we probably can't have in 30 seconds, but yeah, so I would just advise your listeners, before they get their panties in a bunch over social credit, understand it's happening in a lot more places, including the United States. It's just not called social credit.
And I will, of course, have to very graciously disagree. I think the social credit system is very, very different in the way that China's trying to implement it.
I could tell you exactly how it's different in Chinese too. But I'm just saying it's a lot of the parameters of which of which communist China is implementing it.
It's just
they're just doing it on a more integrated scale.
How well you toe the propaganda affects your score, and if you associate with others.
Yeah, but let me tell you this.
Sure.
Next year, you're going to have what's called a star ID to fly your plane. Did you know this? If you want to fly in 2020, you have to get a new type of driver's license that basically telegraphs to the airport that you've made it past a certain point. Did you know this? A real ID, they call it. If you don't have a real ID next year, you will not be allowed to fly. Did you know that? In America.
I just took a flight and I had heard that. Yeah.
Yes. So the problem is right now you don't even need a driver's license to fly. You don't need it. Herman, who went to E3 with me, didn't have a driver's license. He had to go in a different line. He had to be molested and all that, but he still got through. That won't happen next year because you need to provide documentation. You need to do this. You need to make. In America, you could be denied flight if you're on a watch list. Even if you're not guilty.
Possibly. Nathan, I really, unfortunately, we're going to have to save this for another time because honestly, this is a big conversation I really do love to have.
It's very big.
Everyone, hey, that's the end of it. Popzara.com, links at computeramerica.com, all things there. Nathan, thank you so much. Everyone, have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye.